Welcome, everybody. We'll start in just a moment. Thanks for being with us. All right, everybody, I think we will go ahead and begin. Hello and welcome. I'm Jennifer Mnookin, and I have the great luck of being dean here at UCLA School of Law. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that UCLA Law School sits on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. As members of a land-grant institution, we at UCLA pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives, past, present, and emerging. I'd very much like to welcome you to the latest installment in our From the Frontlines virtual series. In today's conversation, we're looking at the rash of violence that's been committed against members of the Asian American community. As we're unfortunately all too aware, there's been a significant increase in the number of reported anti-Asian hate crimes across the country, and especially since the start of the pandemic. This includes 2 high-profile cases in which Asian American women were murdered in New York City just since January of this year, as well as, of course, many other instances and harm over the pandemic period, especially. In discussing this just terrible situation, as well as the path ahead, I hope that our panel of experts will shed light on the history of discrimination against Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, and how we can begin to find lasting solutions to address this significant, longstanding, and terribly harmful problem. I welcome our panelists and thank them so much for joining us for this important conversation. Their bios are in the digital program, which is linked in the chat. I also want to thank APILSA, our Asian Pacific Islander Law Student Association, for co-sponsoring this event. And I want to particularly thank APILSA co-chair, Julia Bach, one of our current law students, who's going to introduce to you and share a little bit about our brand newly created APILSA Scholarship. And so, Julia, let me turn things over to you for just a minute, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dean Mnookin. Hello, my name is Julia Bach, and I am a second-year law student at UCLA School of Law, and the co-chair of the Asian Pacific Islander Law Student Association at this school, also known as APILSA. Over 50 years ago, Asian American students at UCLA Law came together to establish an organization that acknowledges their lived experiences, needs, values, and aspirations, and to create a true sense of belonging. Since then, so many have relied on APILSA's network to help navigate summer internships, the stress of finals, juggling personal and academic demands, finding our first jobs, and so much more. I cannot imagine my law school experience without APILSA. I was the first in my family to attend college and law school. When I came to UCLA, I knew I would not only have to focus on my studies, I needed to find a meaningful support network. APILSA became that community for me, as it has for generations of students before me. I'm dedicated to making sure APILSA remains a part of the UCLA law story forever. APILSA's student leadership and alumni have decided to do just that. Our goal is to create a scholarship at UCLA Law that embodies the spirit of APILSA. This new scholarship will support entering students poised to make a leadership contribution to APILSA and who will pursue issues important to our community during their time in school and after. All of us who are a part of APILSA today ask you to give generously, knowing the important role APILSA has played in so many of our lives. Please follow the link in the chat box to support this effort. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. It's only 2 years into the pandemic, and sometimes we still forget to unmute, right? But thank you so much, Julia, for your remarks, but also your leadership of APILSA and for helping to make APILSA a source of real support and engagement for a great many of our students. I want to just thank you personally for all of that. For those listening, if this is an issue that moves you, I hope you will consider linking to the scholarship and contributing to it. It's something that's very meaningful for APILSA and for our students for whom APILSA is a really significant part of their law school experience. So please feel free to follow the link in the chat box. I also want to thank all of our distinguished panelists. Karin Wang will briefly introduce them. It's my pleasure to very quickly introduce her. She will be moderating today's conversation. Karin is the executive director of UCLA Law School's Epstein Program in Public Interest Law and Policy. And she is a longtime advocate for civil rights, including having spent many years as a leader with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Los Angeles. So please welcome all of our panelists, and you can get longer bios for each of them in the chat and in the program. And let me welcome Karin Wang. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I invite our panelists to show themselves on screen. So it's such an honor to share this is Zoom room today with today's terrific panelists. I am going to briefly introduce them. And again, please take a look at their bios in the program that's been shared if you want to know more about them. First, let me introduce Professor Hiroshi Motomura, who's from UCLA Law. He is a well-known teacher and scholar of immigration and citizenship law. Many of you here today might have taken classes with him in law school. He has written numerous books and articles, testified before Congress, and worked on many legal cases and policy matters involving these issues. And so it goes without saying, he is a preeminent leader on immigration issues. And I'm very excited that he is the new faculty co-director for UCLA Law's brand new Center on Immigration Law and Policy, which launched last year, that is innovating at the intersection of immigration scholarship and practice. Next, we have Angela Oh, who is a mediator with California's Department of Fair Employment and Housing, which is the state's civil rights enforcement agency. And she is also a nationally recognized expert on race relations, including, among many other things, serving as an advisor to the White House after the 1992 Los Angeles civil unrest. Among her many activities, she co-created a program called The Gift of Compassion, which engages in healing through art and meditation, something that I know she has been doing quite a bit of recently. Judge Tammy Ryu, who is a UCLA law graduate, serves on the Los Angeles Superior Court and is a former Deputy Attorney General for the state of California. When she was appointed by Governor Gray Davis in 2002, she was the first Korean American woman to serve on the bench in the state of California, and she continues to be active with Asian and Korean American community groups in Los Angeles. So for today's panel, we have an amazing group here in a very limited period of time. I wanted to start by acknowledging that this issue of rising anti-Asian violence, and actually it's been ongoing now for some years, is both complex and challenging. And so our goal today is not to be comprehensive or to provide all the answers, but instead to share more personal reflections from our panelists as to how the recent violence has touched them and how they believe we can respond and move forward. Also, because we only have an hour together today, I invite you to ask questions of the panel via the Q&A function that you'll see at the bottom. And we will do our best to respond to you there or via email afterwards. But the hope today is to focus on hearing from our speakers during the webinar. So with that, let me move to the first question for our panel. I want to start by saying, in addition to what the Dean shared about the two recent cases in New York, a few days ago, an organization that you may have heard of, Stop AAPI Hate, released its latest report documenting close to 11,000 hate incidents committed against Asian Americans from March 2020 through December 2021. Next week, I think also is important to note, marks the 1 year mark since the shootings in Atlanta that left 6 Chinese and Korean immigrant women dead in a case that has been looked at as a hate-motivated series of murders. So we could do a whole webinar or conference on the first question I'm going to pose, but I'm going to turn to Professor Motomura or Hiroshi and Angela and ask that, given your areas of expertise, what do you think is driving this most recent rise in anti-Asian violence? And I know you could both talk for hours on this, but maybe highlight for us what you think is most important for us to keep in mind at this moment. And I don't know, Hiroshi, if you want to go first on the historical piece, which I know is what you study, or Angela, as it links to your work, but can the two of you respond to that in terms of just the reasons why we're here now?
Well, I can start. First of all, I just want to thank everyone who's here today and everyone who put a lot of hard work into organizing this event. This is an important issue, of course, not just for the Asian American community, but just in general for the country and for the world. And as Karin said, I mean, this is a big topic. And so all we can really do is to provoke and list topics that are explore and discuss. And I'm sure I'll leave out things that are really important. And as Karin said, I mean, we've been invited to speak from personal experience. I'll do that. But I'm also going to bring in some things that I know from having looked pretty carefully at the history of this country and sort of the immigration laws that we have. But I don't want to limit myself to that role as a scholar here. As I think about the question really for me subdivides into two questions. I guess this is what lawyers do. One is why now? And the other is why again? And that's a very different sort of question, because I have to say that I've been on way too many panels on the reasons for anti-Asian violence. And so for me, the question is not just why now, but why again. And so I think that's a way to think about this. So in terms of why now, let me just list a few things. And some of them will be, in the news and not really news in the sense of being things you haven't heard of, but they're things that are familiar to us. I mean, we've had a culture, I think, especially since 9/11, but I think in ebbs and flows in American history, but we certainly have a culture of blaming outsiders, blaming foreigners. It really ramped up, I think, after the 9/11 attacks. But I think that the Trump presidency was a period when this was very much becoming part of public rhetoric, and I think that unleashed or laid the foundation in terms of immediate culture for different kinds of hate, different kinds of violence, different kinds of discrimination. Those are all related, and I don't want to focus so much on sort of the dramatic violence I don't want to do that so much as to move attention away from discrimination in general. We of course have the pandemic, which the former president linked explicitly to China. And we have a period of geopolitical relationships, including but not limited to the US-China, that create an environment where messages of marginalization, messages of violence, potentially messages of hate, find audiences that may be receptive. I also want to acknowledge that people are brittle. People are looking for someone to blame or just lash out against. People who themselves may be vulnerable. So that's a kind of a tour of just some of the things that relate to the why now question. And then there's the question of why again. I think that a lot of Asian American history is a history of marginalization. It's particularly tragic, I think, and that a lot of this marginalization has been through the function of law. I say that from the perspective of someone who's teaching in an institution, be part of an institution that speaks of law as a tool for good and for progress in some broad sense. But in fact, immigration and citizenship laws have been very much have normalized the marginalization of Asian communities. And it's a long history that I'm not going to go through all the details here, but I mean, we have, of course, Chinese exclusion from the 1870s, exclusion of other Asian groups, but more generally, the use of immigration law to marginalize people from parts of the world that were disfavored. It's only been nominally since 1965 that those laws have been done away with, but I'm not sure they entirely have. We also have seen parallel developments in the history of naturalization laws. A lot of people don't know that naturalization was racially restricted and excluded Asian applicants until 1952. And there's a whole history of who even qualifies as white. So setting up whiteness as the thing that makes you eligible, as in some sense the legal goal. So that's a long history that I don't have time to get into here. But the other thing I want to say is that there's been a broad targeting of other laws based on the marginalization created by immigration laws, alien land laws, Japanese American incarceration. And then the last piece of this, and this is just the list, is that I think that these laws have laid the foundation for exclusion from the perceived mainstream of US society. Some of that has to do with certain types of cultural channeling. I also think it's led to the use of the Asian American community as a wedge between white and non-white groups in this society. And so that opens up Asian Americans, I think, as a buffer group that's open to resentment and violence in that situation. So I've gone 26 seconds over my time, but that's just a quick tour of some things I've been thinking about.
Angela? Angela, I think you're muted.
I was hoping to use my bar. Thanks so much for all of that, and I appreciate very much the brief tour. We have got ourselves to a point in 2022 where this long history that's reflected in the law and the politics of this country have very specifically impacted Asians from all different backgrounds. Yes, the Chinese Exclusion Act, read People v. Hall, and listen to how our Supreme Court talked about the veracity or the mendacity of Chinese witnesses who were precipient to a murder, the internment of the Japanese, the targeting really of Korean-owned immigrant businesses in '92, the 9/11 exclusion of Muslims. And now we have this whole new field emerging called crimmigration, in which the intersection of criminal law and immigration law come together, largely out of the experiences, I think, of our Cambodian, Lao, Vietnamese, Chinese immigrant families who are poor. So the other factor is, in my view, the wealth disparity, the incredible wealth disparity. I mean, we used to have rich and poor. Now we have uber rich and uber poor, and it's showing up on the streets of our communities, in LA in particular, where we have over 63,000 people who are unhoused. And we have the defunding of basic human services, mental health services that were taken away during the Reagan years. We have the problem of the anti-Asian rhetoric that arises because every time we turn around, China is our big enemy. And the irony, of course, is that you pick any object up and you look at where it's been made, it's probably been made in China, because we've moved from being a manufacturing society to a service society. So the disparity is not just in terms of the problem of racism and bigotry in this country, but it really is also connected to the disparities with regard to wealth and the ability to build wealth in this society. It's a capitalist context, so it matters. Disparity in terms of education and access. And then there's just the broader question of our inability to understand how inextricably interconnected we are in this day and age. And these structural barriers, and I don't call it anymore the civil or criminal justice system. These are the civil and criminal legal systems. They're delusional. They're not responding to reality. They are, what is a delusion? Reality by agreement, right? And what's the justice system? Reality by agreement. We actually have experts come in and tell you that the value of a white person's hand might be $10,000, but the value of a Cambodian immigrant out of Long Beach, their hand, same right hand, same 5 fingers, same attachment to the body, is worth $500. And then a jury is supposed to make a decision based on an instruction that will be given by a judge to say, you have to make a decision based on the facts that were admitted. I love my job as a mediator because the rules of evidence and procedure don't matter. Anything that the human being who's in the conflict feels is important and relevant to consider gets considered. So the anti-Asian sentiment right now is not new. It's being amplified because of our general meta narrative that is pitting East against West right now. For the moment, we're all Chinese. There was a time when we were all Korean. There was another time when we were all Japanese. And so this is not a new phenomenon. And people who don't hold a consciousness of how the history lives right now and could live into the future are operating with, very few reality checks going on. We have to get to realizing the complexity and figure out how are we going to do this.
Great, thank you, Angela, as well as Hiroshi for your thoughts. And again, we know we can't do justice to all the kind of complicated reasons behind this first question of what's driving this wave. But thank you for sharing some of the many pieces that I think some of us have thought about, and certainly some things I haven't connected. I did want to make one acknowledgement before we move on to our kind of the rest of the panel and getting a more personal perspective from our three speakers, and that is to pick up on something Angela said, which is just to acknowledge that the focus today and what kind of drove the timing of having this today is around the recent wave of pandemic-related violence, much of which has been aimed at people who are perceived to be Chinese or East Asian. And I just wanted to highlight that we recognize that the panelists ourselves and our experiences, what we're speaking of, does focus heavily, not exclusively on this. And I don't want to ignore the fact that many others in our Asian American community have been the targets of brutal waves of violence as well. Angela mentioned 9/11, which is the one that probably most prominently comes to mind, where many South Asians and Muslim Asian Americans were the targets very similarly, and sometimes in worse cases than what we're seeing now. So I just felt it was important to say that. But let's move on to kind of the heart of the panel today, which is this panel is part of a series that the UCLA Law has been hosting titled From the Front Lines. And so the question I have to kind of bring a more personal perspective to this issue of anti-Asian violence is to ask our three speakers to tell us, as your Asian Americans, prominent Asian American lawyers and community leaders, how has anti-Asian violence, whether the current wave or just the waves of it within the last 40, 50 years, how has anti-Asian violence touched you? And I wanted to start with Tammy, with Judge Ryu, because you haven't had a chance to speak yet, and then move to Angela and to Hiroshi. So Tammy.
All right, sure, thank you. I want to just say that as a sitting judge, you would think that you would be immune from racism in court or any other place. And a lot of us who are lawyers or professionals or law students may think that violence or racism or hatred based upon your background or color does not really impact us, but that is not true. So I just want to share a few personal experiences. I'm not going to go back to my childhood, but I do wanted to, since we have some law students here, talk about a racist incident that I experienced while I was a first year at UCLA, walking down to Westwood with a classmate for a meal, and some kids in a bus stop yelling at us, hey, go back to your country, ching chong, right? When I have the right to be on campus and they may not have had the right. I had co-counsel comment to me, oh, your English is so much better than our opposing counsel, who was also an immigrant, thinking that was a non-racist comment. I actually want to share also that a few years ago, I had a defendant in a criminal trial, a very serious case, where he actually, to my face, said, you chink, why don't you go back to where you came from? I mean, that was not a smart thing to say to a judge who was going to possibly sentence you, but that just kind of goes to how deep somebody might feel regarding Asian Americans. And the importance that, or lack of importance or significance our race has on other people. As for in the most recent wave of racism targeting Asian Americans, in the beginning of the pandemic, my oldest, who works in downtown LA in one of the government offices, he was heading towards his express bus to come back home, and somebody just came up to him and say, "Hey, you go back to Wuhan." And that was a shocking thing for him because he was born and raised in the United States and hardly speaks any Korean. But I think that made him and myself realize it doesn't matter how long you've been in the United States, whether your English is perfect or not, whether you were born here and you identify yourself as American more than any other, that you are still going to be subject to racism and always viewed as an outsider. And so I think that we need to keep that in mind as we conduct ourselves every day. As for how it has, this race and the rise in violence has impacted me, every time I would see or read an article about especially elderly Asian getting attacked, I mean, you cannot help but feel so personally hurt and fearful. I mean, I feared for my mom's safety, if she goes out, whether she would be subject to something like that. I think all of us probably felt that way during the pandemic. So it doesn't matter what profession you're in. I think Hiroshi mentioned, the history, and this history is going to keep repeating itself. It'll just be a new issue that will come up, and we need to figure out how. We need to first realize we can avoid this, and secondly, how as individuals we can combat it and make our society better. So that's my sharing.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And then Angela, would love to hear from you, and then from Hiroshi.
So my experiences right now around this issue are with helping folks that are finding themselves in trouble when it comes to expressions of hate. So the most recent thing has been conversations I've been having about the Black-Asian conflict. And I've been asked to deal with this March 16th day of silence that people are asking for in remembrance of the women that were killed in Atlanta. But there's a rift within our community, first of all. Some people thinking that we shouldn't be silent, we should speak, and others thinking we should be silent. Some people within our community feeling we need to speak out about investing more in our services and social services and less in police, and other people saying, no, we need the police. This is our own internal API discourse that's going on in connection with anti-Asian violence. And then there's this whole piece that's happening because I work with folks who are coming back home after serving long stretches in prison. And 2 years ago, one of the former lifers that is a good friend now contacted me about a video he saw of an Asian guy loading weapons, calling for time to respond to all of the Black people attacking our elders and our women. And his instinct was, I got to find this guy and tell him this isn't the way. And, can we do something to build some connection with our Black brothers and sisters? And then this week, I get another call. There's a problem, Angela. On the two coasts in San Francisco and New York, we have Black mayors who could provide leadership, because we're hearing at the real grassroots level that people want to fight back, and that not just with words. Over 61% of the Stop API hate incidents that have been reported have been verbal. Only 16% have been physical assaults. The media plays a huge role in all of this, as they always have. So right now, I had kind of stepped away from all the race stuff because I've been talking about it for years and years and years, working on it at various levels. And I'm finding myself being drawn back into it because in combination with what's happening nationally with the war in Russia and Ukraine, I know they're not calling it a war, but it's a war. It looks like a war. It's happening. And the impact that the anti-China sentiment is having, and our inability to get a handle on racism in this country during the period that we're sitting in right now, which is one of racial reckoning. People are feeling really, really lost, so that even if you report, even if you document, it is not enough to do the work that has to be done, which is that we have to see the humanity in one another. Courts and politicians, priests and politicians, we're the worst, right? Because it's all about a zero-sum game. It's too late for that. We have to think of something else. So that's kind of how I'm seeing the whole anti-Asian violence piece in my personal life right now. That guy, by the way, who reached out to me, the former lifer, we started a Black API healing circle, and we continue to have that circle.
Yeah, let me try to jump in on this. And, this is, I appreciate the invitation for personal reflection. And a lot of it is just sort of thinking about my own sort of reaction to the moment. And actually to prior moments. I'll start by saying that I've experienced over my lifetime many of the kinds of incidents that Judge Ryu recounted in her own life. I think that's kind of a staple of having grown up in the United States in an Asian immigrant family. But let me tell you how I'm sort of reacting to this moment. It's really just a personal reflection. Is I think that these kinds of stressful moments for the Asian American community as a whole make me think differently about time. And my own vulnerability and precariousness. And I think that the best way to explain that is to say that I see this whole situation through my parents' eyes. They came to this country, brought me here when I was 3 years old. But this was, as you might gather, a long time ago. But they came speaking very imperfectly. They did speak English, but very imperfectly with a very strong accent. They were also working class people. My father was a cook, my mother was a seamstress. And so they had that going against them in the situation of trying to fit into society. I know that they experienced a lot of on-the-job discrimination that made things very difficult for them in a way that I didn't experience in anywhere near the same degree. I also know that they came to this country at a time in the immigration history of the United States that was the time when the immigration system made the arrival of African and Asian immigrants extremely difficult, if nearly impossible. I know that they had great struggles to fit in. And I know that a lot of what they struggled with was a very difficult balance between trying to take part in some sense of the American dream and joining the dominant culture, getting ahead, having their kids get ahead, my brother and me, while maintaining their sense of self. And it became, for them, a lifelong struggle. And I think to some extent, that's a way to understand that struggle that, I felt at various times in my life. Between joining dominant culture, but also maintaining a sense of self. I think that much of that has led to fighting against stereotypes. I think there's a great deal of stereotyping that goes on that's directed against the Asian American community. And I remember basically when I was in high school, people were shocked that I was thinking about I'm not sure. Well, maybe high school, maybe college is when I was thinking about law school. I mean, because that just wasn't done. I mean, there are very few Asian Americans in my law school class, very few. And it was seen as actually like almost like a rebellious move to go to law school in my community. And I think that over time, I've done a number of things because people didn't think that's what I was supposed to be doing, including things that were not necessarily things I was supposed to do. I think my response to the model minority myth was to stop going to class in college and things like that. So, so that's, I think this fighting against stereotypes is something that the current moment makes me realize that has been very much part of my own experience. A couple other thoughts here. One is the question of, why now makes me see the dimension of time. It really helps me be in touch with my own parents' experience and the struggles that they faced, but I also realize that that is a struggle that is that many other newcomers to America from many places in the world, and for that matter, people who feel who are marginalized within this country in spite of having been here for generations. It really makes me think about the dimensions of time as in that in how that struggle has taken place over decades. The last thought is it's a big topic, but it makes me understand the dimension of place, because I came back to California after many years away, and I lived in other parts of the country. Most recently, before Los Angeles, I was living in North Carolina, and I've spent a fair amount of time living in Europe as well, and some time living in Japan. And it makes me realize that much of this is, I feel a certain way and more comforted in Los Angeles than I would if I in some of my travels. But it makes me realize that time and place really do matter. And I'm not totally sure I have a formula for why they matter, but I think that when I talk to people, Asian Americans in different parts of the country, I realize that their experience in a different time and a different place are very different from mine, although there's a lot of commonalities.
Thank you, Hiroshi and Angela and Tammy, for sharing your very diverse personal perspectives on how this issue has touched your lives. I wanted to shift us towards kind of like that sort of reflecting back on what's happened so far or recently, and now thinking through the other kind of goal of today's conversation, which is looking forward and how we respond, how we take action. And I wanted to actually pivot us to a couple of good questions that have come up in the Q&A that are related. So I'm going to start here as part of the, how do we think about how to respond and take action given the wave that has been rising and also ongoing. Two questions posed around the media that I think are related. The first one from Maria Elena asking how do we hold the media accountable for their influence on these types of issues, which I think gets at the issue that a lot of the violence that's been happening probably is traceable to this era we're in, where there is 24/7 media. There is tons of coverage about this coming out of China, and that was the original framing of this issue. And then the other question that Danielle asked, which I think is great, is also acknowledging media plays a huge role. And in one of the sub-issues around anti-Asian violence, there's been this heavy focus on Black offenders or Black perpetrators, even though there's actually been quite a few studies and news articles that have come out that have not gotten the same press, really showing that the vast majority of anti-Asian violence and harassment is actually coming from primarily white offenders. And so I want to ask the three speakers, if we didn't prepare for this question, but I wanted to see if any of the three of you would like to speak to this kind of media aspect of fanning the flames of the violence, as well as who to blame for it, and creating some of the dynamics that we're living through. So Hiroshi, Angela, or Tammy. I think Angela, wanted to respond, so we'll start with her. Oh, Angela, are you there? You may be frozen. I'm not hearing you. Angela, why don't we come back to you? I see Tammy is unmuted. Tammy, do you want to address either of
Sure, I'll go. I really like what Angela said about being involved in this Black API healing circle, because my idea of a concrete step that we can take to address this rise in violence. First, I think we need to acknowledge that there's rise in violence against all groups, especially groups of people of color. And I think the one way that we can address the rise against Asians is to build solidarity and unity with other minority groups. I think that there's always this divide and conquer, strategy, so to speak, a way that like white supremacy and people who may think that pitting one racial group against another would be effective in diluting our voice. And I think we need to acknowledge that the racism is not just from the majority society against Asians. Racism is against people of color, immigrant communities, all of us together. And we have to build coalition effectively and compassionately and from within our hearts to actually combat racism. I remember after the riots, and Angela was our leader at the time in trying to educate communities in LA regarding the suffering of the Korean American store owners who were the targeted victims of the looting and theft and other crimes. And I remember trying to help and advocate for the store owners to rebuild. But on the other hand, we wanted to make sure that we also empathize and understand why there may be opposition to the rebuilding in certain communities. And then that kind of takes us back a little bit to the Sunja-do case. And I now sit in Compton Courthouse where Sunja-do was tried, or her case was pending. And there were apparently a lot of rallies and demonstrations outside of the courthouse because Sunja-do shot and killed a 15-year-old African-American girl. So at that time, because I was a relatively young attorney and did not practice criminal law, and I came from a background where my parents as immigrants owned stores to make a living in this country. And we actually, our family had owned a grocery store in West Oakland, which is kind of like South Central LA in economics and who lives there. And I remember identifying with Sunja-do, not just because she was Korean American, but because we were store owners and we were victims of a lot of crimes when we were running the store. But years later, I was invited by someone to like a book signing event where an author had written a book about the life that was lost in Latasha Harlins. And so you have, because of our background, we associate with one group we believe are victimized. But then you have another group that has also been victimized who has suffered a loss. So how do we then work together, right, to understand each other and to build coalitions? Because unless we build coalitions, I think that we will always be pitted against each other and we will always be divided and conquered, right? So I think that building coalition with other minority groups, especially the Black community, is very important. And I know that Angela already spoke about this. And I think that Asians have to acknowledge that our experience is very similar to other minority groups. I recently watched a movie by Justin Chon called Blue Bayou, and it has to do with a Korean American man who was adopted when he was very young from Korea, but then was never made a citizen. So because of his criminal history, he ultimately got deported, even though he was married to a Caucasian woman and he had practically adopted her child from prior marriage, who was also Caucasian, and then his wife was pregnant with his child. But he ultimately, for a lot of different reasons, ended up getting deported. And I was thinking, this is so similar to the stories that I know of from other immigrant communities, not just API. And I thought, we need to be able to relate to each other, find commonality, and because we have so much in common. We have so much in common with Hispanic community, with the African American community. And I think we need to kind of focus on what we have in common so that when one group is targeted, that we can all join together. And when we join together, we get to know each other. And I think when you get to know each other as persons, actually have conversations, share each other's stories, that's when the racism and prejudice kind of disappear. So I think that us building coalition, one thing that, and I'll leave with this is, when Black Lives Matter, when George Floyd got killed, and there were all these demonstrations all over the country, one picture that really stood out to me was that I saw who appeared to be like first generation older Korean Americans demonstrating with other people in the protests and with signs, like I can't breathe, or sometimes they translate it into Korean or other languages. And I thought, this is so good. This is what we need. We need to support each other. We need to go out there and say, we feel your pain and we will support you. And I think what will happen is they will feel our pain and they will support us as well. So I think that's one way that we can help ourselves is when we help each other.
I wanted to get back to the media piece because I think it's a really important question. And thank you, Tammy, for all of that. 30 years ago, we could go to the LA Times editorial board. We could go to the stations and have meetings, and did, about how you're covering. We could work with the Unity journalists, who are all the journalists of color, to make changes about who is leading. And to this day, we have media outlets that are dealing with BIPOC and non-conforming gender identity, non-binary identity community members who want to have a voice and allow new narratives to emerge. The fight is going on so many levels for belonging and inclusion and welcome and respectful kind of engagement. And unfortunately, in 2022, the social media channels are so incredibly present in everyone's life, and there's no source that can be really trusted. And so what I would say is that understand that all of the media right now is propaganda, all of it. And I don't care if you're a New York Times reader, a Washington Post reader, a Guardian reader, if you listen to Democracy Now!, NPR, it's all propaganda. You have to have your lived experience guide your judgment. The first noble truth is that all of life is suffering. That's in a nutshell. And there are 3 other noble truths that get you out of that mess. But there are no shortcuts here, right? There just are no shortcuts. We're dealing with a transformational moment in a time when at a global level, things are falling apart, and it's all connected. Our degradation of the environment is causing a certain kind of suffering. The strong-arm leadership that we're seeing getting elected, suffering. The inability to speak language is one thing, but the inability to see humanity is huge. And so what I'm thinking is media, I don't trust any of it. You know, I spend a lot of my time watching K-dramas at night just to have another parallel universe. I used to say in the 90s, when I did a lot of public speaking, the Korean immigrant store owners and the rest of LA, we live in parallel universes. What I mean is we occupy the same physical space, but the Korean community is not reading the Metro section of the LA Times. And the people that are in LA running things, they know nothing about our community. And it's getting worse, it really is. You know, and because of the materialism that we've gone through, and now people are waking up to, oh yeah, there's a bigger problem out there on the horizon. I mean, we really have.
Oh no, I think Angela is having some internet instability issues. I think we lost her. Why don't we come back to Angela when her internet stabilizes? And Hiroshi, I know you have some thoughts on the media piece and just this question of moving forward.
Yeah, let me say something about media quickly, and then also move on to moving forward, which I think we're definitely getting into. The media piece brings up attention in my mind, attention that I think is worth naming and then trying to negotiate. And I think it's something that I want to say, especially to in this setting of law school and lawyers and law students. I think that part of my reaction is that this is a very complicated issue. The question is really what are the foundational reasons, and so that part of me wants to avoid it's kind of the simple message, and the soundbite message, which can be very hateful or simply disinformation. I mean, so that's one part of the balance. But the other part of the balance is to say that I think complex realities can still be presented straightforwardly. So how do you do that? I think that the occupational hazard of lawyers is that if there's a 10-second destructive disinformation soundbite that the impulse is to come up with 50 words or a longer and more complicated message. But one of the things that I think is important to understand is the way you present those messages, and that and it's not just a matter of writing a legal brief or writing an op-ed in the LA Times, but really trying to influence more popular culture and narrative. And I think that that's a really important thing that is very difficult. I think that I've spent a lot of time struggling with that and trying to train myself to be much more attentive to those things. I mean, it was a very eye-opening and sobering moment for me to realize that if I counted up all the books I've sold and lectures I've given, it is nothing compared to the fact that I'm on a Try Guys video that has over 7 million views that explains the injustice of the immigration system. And so I think you can present complex realities in a way that is outside the legal advocacy box, but I think is really important in affecting how way people think about this. In terms of moving forward, I only have a few minutes, so let me just say this. I think it's really important to resist the temptation. A couple of things. One is I really endorse the need for coalition and understanding how the Asian American experience is the same as many other groups that have been targeted and marginalized. I mean, that is super important. Beyond that, I think it's we need to focus on much more than the superficial. I had a I would have to say a disturbing experience when I testified in Congress on this issue about a year ago. There was a strong effort by people on the House subcommittee that were unsympathetic to the point of the hearing, which was to understand anti-Asian violence, Asian American violence. There were two moves that were going on. One was an attempt to deflect and focus on just individuals who were doing bad things and not understanding sort of the background for this. That was a major issue. And the other thing that happened in that hearing was there was an attempt to deflect and change the subject to affirmative action. And so this was both looking superficially and changing the subject into deflecting. And I think that, you know, if those were really deeply troubling, because I think that they were so either disingenuous or so focused on the question of looking at this as a very isolated and aberrational, that it was deflecting away from the question of why does this keep happening?
Mhm.
Thank you, Hiroshi. And I think we have Angela back now. So Angela, I'm sorry, we lost you. I'm sure, I know you were in the middle of saying something and about to wrap up. So let's come back to you to what you wanted to share.
You know, for now, all I would want to share is that there are no shortcuts. And I saw the note about, you know, everyone says build coalitions. So then we take the time and effort and we build them, and then no one shows up. So I think, you know, every situation has to be assessed for what it is. For myself, I'm spending my time doing healing circles. That's what I find to be the most useful. And I'm holding space for people to meditate. And I'm offering people the opportunity to learn something about how the mind and the body and the spirit come together. And, you know, that's kind of what I do. And then with my training and my experience, I've been mediating cases that, in my opinion, have two injured parties: the person that's been discriminated against or harassed, and then the person who has also been accused of being a racist or a harasser. Maybe the evidence is there, maybe it's not, but I always feel I have two injured people, two injured parties in front of me. And so I get to hone my skills in that way to teach myself how do I extend the compassion? How do I extend the intelligence? It's about the head, it's about what's in the heart, and then it's about what you do with what you know and feel. So.
Great. We are right up against when this program is supposed to end. So I just wanted to add a couple of my 2 cents, trying to wrap some of this up, which is one thing in response to the media that I just wanted to mention. And some of this is actually caught in the Q&A, which I know we're recording this program, and some people may be watching this after the live broadcast and not have the advantage of what those of us here now can see in the chat. So I just wanted to mention that on the media piece, I think one thing around kind of how the media has used us, both as victims and kind of created us as victims, and then also pitted us against other communities, is to really invest in and follow Asian American media creators. There has been so much written from Asian Americans and put out by Asian Americans, bloggers and others, op-ed pieces. So I would just encourage us to really follow that. I dropped one link into response to one of the questions that was around, you know, why have so many of the victims, high-profile victims, been Asian American women? There are a lot of Asian American women who have written about this in the past 2 years, especially. And then one of the other things that we didn't get to, but was in response to some questions, is I just wanted to mention another action step is many of us here have children. Many of us maybe for the first time actually pushing our school districts and others to teach about Asian Americans. So part of the long-term strategy around addressing some of these issues is making Asian Americans less unknown and less this kind of foreign you know, group of people that other Americans don't know and understand. And so there's a lot of great resources from recent documentaries and curriculum. So a lot of this is in the chat. I just want to mention it because there are so many things that we can each do individually to respond and help push back and kind of stem this wave. And so with that, I'm sorry we are out of time. I do really want to thank all of our speakers. Thank Judge Ryu, Professor Motomura, and Angela. Thank the Dean, Jennifer Mnuchin, and Julia Bach from APILSA for speaking earlier. Want to remind you that one super easy way all of you can do something to support the Asian American community, whether you're part of it or standing in solidarity, is to donate to the APILSA scholarship mentioned earlier. We can drop that link again into the chat. It is a way to invest in the future Hiroshi's, Tammy's, and Angela's of our community who will lead us into the future. So please at least do that. And with that, I want to thank you all for being here and thank everyone who was part of this program. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.